Start with just a little recap of last week, because we're in the middle now of a 3-week series on what it means to follow Jesus, what it means to be a true follower of Jesus. And last week we talked about the difference between being a fan and a follower, as Joyce pointed out earlier, and the difference between being a fan of Jesus and a follower of Jesus, and what that truly means in our lives. And your homework was, and I know you all did your homework because you got on all your kids to do your homework as well, but your homework was to go home and to look at the verses and to say, and ask yourself the tough question, am I a fan or am I a follower? What have I been in my life? And my guess is that, I hope I am the only one, but my guess is that I'm not the only one who, when I first had to ask that question myself, I came back with the answer, I've been more of a fan than a follower for most of my Christian life. And when I first asked the question, that's the answer I came back with. And my guess is that many of you guys, if you look at your lives matter-of-factly, you're more of a fan and less of a follower of Jesus, or at least that's what you've been in most of our lives. And that's okay. You've got a lot of company. All right? I know I have a lot of company. I think that most of the American church are fans of Jesus instead of followers of Jesus. And we talked about how Jesus wants followers. And this week, we're going to kind of take that the next step further. And we left last week with this idea of Jesus down on one knee, asking us to marry him, asking us to commit fully to him, asking us to make him our one and only, asking us to align our heart with his, asking us to basically give our lives completely over to him and to marry him. And see, Jesus, just like any good fiancé who is there on one knee, knows that right after you're there on one knee, you got to start the wedding planning right after it. All right? And I remember about a year and a half, 2 years ago, when Maria and I were doing wedding planning, that it's rough, it's tough, it's a lot of stuff. I honestly think that engagement is a preordained thing by God to make sure that you're ready for marriage, because you're going to get in fights during your engagement. Get ready for that, that wedding ceremony. And the one thing that you got to have is you got to have invitations. Invitations are huge when it comes to it. And for some of you, maybe it's been a while since you had to go pick out invitations. It's only been a year and a half, 2 years for me, so I'll just refresh your mind on the whole invitation process. We walked into a store, a wedding store, all right, that has all, different invitations and all other stuff. We walked in, we said, we'd love to pick out some invitations. And the woman gave us 5 binders, about this thick each, and said, have fun. Look, and literally it was hours. And luckily, Catherine and my wife went ahead of me and did a bunch of the legwork beforehand. But there's different colors, there's different little things on the border. You can have flowers, you can have little fruits, you can have nothing. You can have something that looks very elegant, you can have something that looks like a kindergartner cut it out. You can have something that is gold foil plated and everything else, or you can have something that's just something that looks like something you could do on your own computer. It's amazing. There's thousands and thousands of different types of invitations out there, but some things remain the same across all sorts of invitations. Normally you want your invitation to look like the ceremony. It'd be kind of weird if you got an invitation that said, hey, yo, come to our wedding ceremony, it's going to be kind of cool, and then everyone is in tuxes once you get there. It'd be like, doesn't line up, doesn't work. Just the same if I were to use all the lofty language of a formal wedding like Maria and I used, and then everyone shows up and the whole bridal party's in polos and khakis. It wouldn't fit. Everything's got to fit. The other thing the invitation has to have is it's got all the good information on there, like who's invited, what they're invited to, where they're invited to, how to get there, why they're invited. The why is usually pretty easy with the wedding invitation, but the who is one of the biggest things in the world. And all these questions are necessary to make a great invitation. Any invitation that's lacking any of this stuff, it comes up short. You don't know what's going on, and I know that from experience because my wedding invitations did not exactly say the who very, very well, and it got really awkward really fast at our wedding ceremony. Most people who were there don't even know it, but we had some people who, you had a +1 to some people so they can bring a date, and other people you're like, we're really tight on money, you can't have a +1. Well, someone we didn't invite for them to have a date brought a date, which was kind of weird in the first place because they invited a date that Maria and her are more of acquaintances, but they didn't exactly get along in college. But this woman and Maria this woman was now at Maria's wedding, which was just kind of awkward and weird. She wasn't invited in the first place, but she got brought as a date. Well, to make the matters even worse, we went to do the whole garter bouquet thing. She caught the bouquet. So the woman who wasn't even invited at all and was brought by the guy who wasn't even given a date catches the bouquet, is all over our wedding album pictures. Everywhere is this woman's face in all of our stuff. We can't get it away from everything. And this woman that we didn't really even want to invite is all of a sudden like poster child for who was at our wedding. And it was just awkward. It was because we really didn't do a great job on the whole who thing. The whole who thing was just a little bit weird. But Jesus is a lot better with his invitation than I am and Maria are, thank the Lord. And he gives us all the information. And see, the thing is that the invitation, we expect it to come in a verse that's well known. Like a John 3:16. That's a real cozy invitation. You know? God so loved the world, he gave his only one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish but have eternal life. That's like one of those warm and fuzzy verses. Like, I really like John 3:16. And I think it's a part of the invitation. But I think Jesus really sums up his invitation in a verse that most of us haven't memorized. Most of us would rather not have been written in the Bible. A difficult verse again. But it's his invitation for us to follow. And it comes in Luke 9:23. And it's short, it's sweet, it's one sentence, but it gives us all the information that we need to be invited in. It says, if anyone would come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. Again, not warm and fuzzy. I'll say it again just for those of you who didn't get how not warm and fuzzy it was. If anyone would come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. My guess is not many of us know that verse by heart. Not many of us are like, that's one that I memorized. It's sort of in that same category we put the one we looked at last week, where you've got to hate your father and mother, your whole family, and comparison how much you love Jesus in order to follow him. We don't like those verses. They're hard. They're difficult. We'd rather, if we were writing the Bible, we'd probably be like, yeah, God, that looks good, and then try to erase it out of there. But Luke 9:23 is along those same lines. So what we're going to do today, and I'm going to try to make it as lively as possible, we're going to work through this verse. And we're going to work through it. I'm going to show you guys exactly who is invited, exactly what they're invited to, exactly how to be part of that great ceremony. What this invitation really unpacked is, because as you look through this verse, you can get everything you know about the invitation to follow. And so it starts off with this word, anyone. If anyone. This word anyone is it's small, it's simple. You guys are like, yeah, okay, I get it. Anyone. Anyone means everyone. Every single person here. Anyone means no matter what your past is, anyone is invited to it. This is something that the American church, we've been horrible at telling the outside world at. Talk to someone who doesn't know much about Christianity, and they think that they have to get their life right before they come and walk through the church door. It's the exact opposite. You walk through a church door and you most likely are going to get your life right at some point. It's the exact opposite. Anyone is invited to the party. Anyone is invited in. It doesn't matter the difference. And the Bible is full of different illustrations of people's lives where Jesus came in and he worked, and all of a sudden these unlikely heroes become the most amazing people in the Bible. And one I want to highlight that we don't really get a lot of verses about, but we know enough to get his story, is the man Matthew, the man who wrote the book that Joe's been going through for the last 5 years. I mean, 5 months. I mean, just the last couple weeks. The man Matthew, he wrote the gospel. And we think of Matthew and we think of that gospel. But to get Matthew's full story, we got to go back to when Jesus came and called him. See, Matthew before Jesus was a tax collector. Tax collecting was the bottom rung. You think like some of the jobs that are out there right now, like I don't even know, like being a porta-john cleaner out. I mean, I don't know, whatever. Like you think that's bad. This was horrible. Absolutely horrible. His own family, he was Jewish. His own family probably disowned him because Jewish people didn't really like the fact that, Roman Empire had all this control over them. But he worked for Caesar. He made sure that people paid their money to Caesar so that Caesar got his lump of change out of everyone's paycheck or heard of whatever. I don't know what the whole deal was, but they got their piece of the pie. In addition to that, Matthew's profession was wrought with corruption and deceit. Tax collectors were notorious for lining their own pockets by lying about how much you owed to Caesar. They'd inflate that price, and then all the extra left over, they'd line their own pockets with. So Matthew, he's Jewish, probably disowned by his family because of his profession, does his profession anyways. He's lying, he's deceitful. He knows because he's Jewish that he's completely living outside of what God desires for him, because he's at least gone to the synagogue. He knows what's going on. And then one day, a young rabbi comes up to him and just says, "Come and follow me." Short, sweet, to the point. Come and follow me. And Matthew knew exactly what this meant. He knew that to be a rabbi's follower meant he dropped everything. He was probably going to be just living off of whatever this rabbi was able to get by on. He knew that he probably was going to be homeless, that he was going to be just, he was going to have a really difficult life as he followed this rabbi. He was going to have to give up all of this job and everything else to come follow Jesus. He knew that he wasn't the person. You had to be like the straight-A student that had the 4.0 from Harvard and everything else to be a disciple of a rabbi. It was the cream of the crop got in. He knew he wasn't that. Yet for whatever reason, he said yes. He became a disciple. He then goes forth, and he becomes one of the 11 people that turns the world upside down through the love of Jesus and spreads Christianity everywhere. He's now looked back on 2,000 years later. First of all, his name's remembered. Kind of cool. 2,000 years later, people knew who Brian was just by his first name and knew it was me. That'd be really awesome, just saying. Second off, he's considered a saint. He wrote one of the 4 Gospels. And none of us think of him as a tax collector. None of us remember that. Anyone is invited. No matter what you've done, no matter where you've been, no matter what's going on, Christianity is not like buying a car. There's no with-approved credit clause at the end. There's no fine print legal stuff at the end of it. There's no guy talking really, really fast at the end of the commercial. It's just anyone. Whether you have a sexual past, you're from a broken home, you're a social outcast, Jewy record, a prison record, you're a pothead, you're an addict, you're a hypocrite, you're anything else, fill in the blank. Because we all have stuff. No matter what, anyone is invited. See, Jesus' who is a whole lot better than Maria and my who. His who on the invitation is a whole lot more encompassing. He'd be really happy if that woman came and caught the bouquet. Maria and I, not so much, all right? Anyone is invited. So we get anyone would come after me. Come after me is the next bit of it. So if anyone would come after me, and this phrase, come after me, it's so bland in the English language. Just come after me. And just, like there's nothing exciting about it. Which is really a shame because you go back to the Greek and what it really means is a passionate pursuit. A passionate pursuit as if you're courting the person that you love. You're in that wooing phase. I love that word, wooing phase of your relationship. All right? You're in that phase where you're just trying to shower that person with just love and affection. They're always on your mind. You always want to be on their mind. You're always trying to find ways to get into their thought process. I remember when Maria and I were dating, and we had a back and forth dating relationship. I got lucky, and she dated me for a while. Then she wised up and decided that she would dump me for a little bit. Then, I don't know, she drank the water again, decided she wanted to date me again, and then she wised up again, and all of a sudden, and then one more time, and finally we got married at the end of it. But I was sold out from day one. She, rightfully so, was not so sold out from day one at the beginning. But I was sold out from day one. And whether we were dating or not, I would always, always, always try to find ways to just make sure she knew I was out there. Make sure she knew. We didn't go to the same college or anything else, and we dated back and forth through college, and yeah, it was fun. But her college could be on my way to Bridgewater, which means that I would take an hour-long detour out of my way to go down to my college to swing by her college, which I took often on my ways back and forth, just so I could drop off a bouquet of flowers at the door, knowing that she wasn't there, that she was in class, but she'd come back to it later on. Or leave a little note, or make a phone call every once in a while, or a text, whatever the case may be. I was always trying to pursue her and let her know that I was there. I was around. Took her a while to figure out that I was okay to be around, and I think she probably was about ready to take out a restraining order a couple times on me, but I stopped short of just hanging out in the bushes outside, which is good, so. But it's a passionate pursuit that Jesus is inviting us on. Following him is not some just ho-hum, follow the leader that you did in elementary school to get from one class to the next. It's not some little game that is just child's play. It's literally a passionate pursuit of Jesus as the lover of your soul. He already loves you more than anything. He already has gotten down on one knee saying, will you marry me? And just the same, what he's inviting you to is to passionately pursue him back as the greatest lover you'll ever know. It's like the story in Matthew 13. And Jesus tells it's a one-verse story, literally. Jesus is amazing what he can do. One verse story of how Jesus talks about that the kingdom of heaven is like a treasure that's been hidden in a field. And a man digs it up and then he puts it back in there, sells everything he has just to buy the land, knowing that the treasure is there. He does everything he can just to get to the kingdom of God because he's passionately pursuing it with everything he has. He's willing to give up everything for it. You see, fans want to play it safe. They're like, yeah, this whole thing sounds great, but a passionate pursuit, really? Not quite so sure about that. They want all the reward without the commitment level. Followers are the opposite. Following means that you have a passionate pursuit of Jesus as the lover of your soul, deep within you. And that's the true heart of following. That's what Jesus is inviting us into. So, we're all invited to passionately pursue Jesus, but Jesus gives us a couple of these little how statements. How do you get there? What's the deal here? And he gives us two of them here in this verse. And it starts out with this is where the verse really goes downhill for most of us. We're like, we don't like this. All of a sudden, the first one is, you must deny yourself. Denying ourselves is not fun. It's not easy. It's one of the most difficult things to do, honestly, as a follower. This whole series is based off a book I talked about last week called Not a Fan by Kyle Eilerman. And straight out of the book, I'm going to read you exactly what he says because sometimes people just put things in the perfect words and you don't need to change them. And he says, followers are willing to deny themselves and say, I choose Jesus. I choose Jesus over my family. I choose Jesus over money. I choose Jesus over my career. I choose Jesus over shopping, over video games, the game on TV, over the person I'm dating, over what others think about me, over fill in the blank. A follower makes a decision every single day to deny himself and choose Jesus, even if it costs him everything. To deny yourself literally means that you deny everything that you desire so that you can have everything that Jesus desires for your life. To deny yourself, and this is what other translations, like the New Living Translation says, it means putting off your selfish nature. And that's not just like the selfish nature that we like to think about, but it's all the stuff that seems good, but it's actually us being selfish towards Jesus. Family is a great thing. It's an awesome thing. But the deal is that when family gets lifted higher in our lives than Jesus is, family becomes a detrimental thing to our life. Money is not a bad thing to have, believe me. It's a good thing to have. I don't know from personal experience, but I hear it's pretty awesome. All right? But if it becomes a greater drive than Jesus is in our life, again, it's detrimental to our lives. Fill in the blank, anything in life, even if it's a good thing, if placed higher than Jesus, is a bad thing in our own lives. Denying yourself means that Jesus comes first, period. End of story. And it means that when the decision comes between Jesus and our career, Jesus and our job, Jesus and our family, Jesus and our money, it's not even a question. It's Jesus. Every single time. Told you, the verse isn't fun. It's hard. It literally reminds me of a phrase that we often overlook in the New Testament. See, at the beginning of Paul's letters, Paul always has a greeting out there, and the greeting usually goes something along the lines of, Paul, a bondservant of Christ Jesus. Well, we normally just, like, those first verses in Paul's letter, we're like, that's just the greeting, throw it out, we glance over it, we don't look at it. That word bondservant actually is really important, though, to understand our relationship with Jesus. Because that word bondservant actually more accurately translated is bondslave. And a bondslave in the Old Testament is a really interesting situation a person would find themselves in. See, in the Old Testament, the Jewish people were allowed to have slaves. So I go, okay, slaves, but they had to free those slaves every 7 years. So it wasn't slavery the way we normally think of it, but they were allowed to have slaves, but every 7 years they had to free them. And not only free them, but they usually gave them some stuff to make it so that their lives actually, they'd be able to live as free people. They'd have like a little piece of land and maybe a couple, head of cattle just to get them by and get them started in life. Well, see, a bond slave was someone who at the end of their 7 years sat there, and when they were about to get all this stuff and be freed out and have their life as free again, they sat there and they turned to their master and said, I don't want that. I bind myself willingly to you as your slave for the rest of my life, because my life with you is better than it is outside of you. My life bound to you as a slave is better than it is on my own, being free. Paul calls himself a bond slave, and that's exactly what we are. Romans says that we're slaves to one of two things, either sin or Jesus. And it's one or the other. Who are you a slave to? Denying yourself means that you sit down, you willingly say, I'm a slave to Jesus. I give it up to you, Jesus. I bind myself as a slave to you willingly. This is where our word Lord that we talk about God as comes from. Slave would call their master Lord every time they would ask for something. That word Lord is literally what came of that idea of being a slave to Jesus. That Christians everywhere started calling God their Lord, just as a slave calls their master that. Along the same lines of denying yourself, you also are told to take up our cross daily. And I've preached on this verse, and it's almost been a year, I think, and I actually talked about this a little bit, but this, take up your cross daily, literally means come and die. It's a great Christian slogan. I think we should do it for all our Christian churches. Say, welcome to Connection Church, come and die. Welcome, come and die. Come and die so that you may truly live. To take up your cross daily literally means to take up humiliation, to take up suffering, to take up death of yourself, your nature, your selfish nature, who you want to be, and put it to rest so that God can live through you. To take up your cross is a choice. It says to take up your cross daily. And that's important. Because it's the daily choice we have to make. When you look at yourself in that mirror first thing in the morning, it's making that choice. Am I going to take up my cross today? Or is my cross going to stay in the closet? Because it's just too heavy today. Crosses are not fun. They're not... They were signs of death. They were signs of humiliation. The person who carried their cross had things thrown at them. They were mocked. They were jeered. No one would have any sympathy for them. They went through suffering. It hurt. You were probably whipped, you were probably beaten, you were then nailed to the thing. It hurt. It was suffering. And it ended up resulting in death. It's not easy, but it leads to the best life. See, unfortunately, again, the American church, we've engaged in, I like to call it snuggie theology. It's warm, it's cozy, it's soft, it's nice and easy. It's John 3:16 and that's it. It's nice and simple. It's easy. And believe me, I love the verse John 3:16. Don't get me wrong. But it's just not the full gospel. It's not everything that's there. Snuggie theology tells you that we promise all things good for you, when in actuality, Christianity asks you to choose death. To choose your instrument of death every single day, so that Christ may truly live through you. As I was looking at this, what really came to mind was that many of us, we're trying really hard to be good Christians. We're really working hard. But the fact is, many of us need to stop trying to be good Christians and start dying to be followers of Christ. Because the more we try, the more it's actually we're trying to do it on our own and we're not dying in the process. It's Jesus living through us that allows us to do these things that we consider good Christian things. And Jesus, just like any good invitation, sums it all up in the next verse. In Luke 9:24, he sits there and says, "For whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for me will save it." So here's what Jesus is literally asking. He's saying, will you follow me? Will you go forth and put me first? Will you take my invitation up? What he's saying is that in order to take my invitation up, you must be willing to deny yourself and put off all your sinful nature and choose him over literally everything. And if you do that, you're actually going to save your life in the end. But if you put yourself first, you put your family first, you put your money over God and everything else, you put all these things over God and everything else, he says in the end, it's all lost. You missed the boat completely. You didn't get it. There's so many of us that have, and I've been guilty of this many times, that we make our lives about the next rung on the corporate ladder. We make our lives about making sure we have enough for our families, and those are all good pursuits. But we lose Jesus in the way. And in the end, we lost the boat in the process. We completely have missed it. It comes down to, will you deny yourself and put yourself forward? What Jesus is inviting you to is the most amazing, passionate pursuit. The greatest love affair you could ever be a part of. It'd be the central part of the greatest love story that's ever been. Romeo and Juliet got nothing on what Jesus has for you. What he's asking for, though, is you to lay down your life for it, though. You to say, not me, but you, Jesus. It's not easy. Don't get me wrong. It's not easy. And people are going to think you're weird when you live this way. People will not understand you when you live this way. The few times that I've gotten it right, I know that's the case. But it's good. And it leads to the best places possible. And it's exactly what Jesus is calling his followers into. Anything short of being willing to lay our lives down for Jesus is fandom. It's just being a fan of Jesus. He's got tons of fans. He's got more fans than every single pop star on Facebook. He's got more likes than anyone could ever ask for. How many of those people, though, are really followers? Are really willing to lay down everything they have and follow him? So my question, not really even my question, what Jesus is asking you and me this morning is, will you follow? Will you take up his invitation? What's your RSVP going to be to this wedding? Are you ready to go the whole way and follow Jesus and be like Matthew, who sat there and said, okay, I'm giving up everything for this? Matthew was probably a rich dude. I mean, he was lining his pockets with other people's money, as well as his wage that he got from the Roman Empire. He was probably well off. And he got rid of everything in order to follow Jesus and be homeless for 3 years and learn from some weird guy who has no home and ends up being crucified and killed 3 years later. But 2,000 years later, we still know who he is. We know him as a man who turned the world upside down through the power of Jesus, because he said, I choose Jesus over everything. It's good to choose Jesus over everything, but it's not easy. Will you follow Jesus? That's your question this week. You guys see a theme. Last week was the question, this week's a question, next week will probably be a question as well. It's kind of a theme that goes with it all. Take some time this week. Dive through the verses that are on the back of the bulletin. Ask yourself, am I going to follow? It costs you everything, but in the end you gain even more. The whole contradiction of Christianity. It's awesome.